The first time I realized I was invisible, I was sitting in a polished glass conference room, watching a man named Trevor Kane present my compliance strategy like it had arrived to him in a dream during a morning workout. Every chart, every policy revision, every risk projection on that giant screen had come from me. I had built the entire roadmap while fighting a migraine so brutal I could barely read my own laptop screen, running on vending machine coffee and 4 hours of sleep because I also had an MBA exam that same night. Yet there Trevor stood in his expensive cufflinks, grinning while executives nodded like he had just reinvented finance itself. Meanwhile, I sat 3 seats away taking notes like a silent assistant nobody remembered hiring. That was the culture at Sterling Ridge Capital. People like me kept the company alive, but people like Trevor got applause for surviving the fire someone else put out. I worked as the chief compliance officer, which basically meant I spent my life stopping executives from accidentally committing federal crimes while they complained that regulations ruined creativity. I became the woman everyone rolled their eyes at during meetings because I kept saying words like disclosure requirements and reporting obligations while they wanted to talk about branding and networking retreats. One vice president actually asked me once if we could make our compliance slides less negative because they hurt the energy of the presentation. That was the moment I realized I was working inside a daycare for adults with stock options. After a while, I stopped trying to earn respect from people who benefited from disrespecting me. Instead, I quietly started building my way out. 3 nights a week, I carried my laptop into the back corner of a dying sandwich shop near campus, ordered the same dry turkey sandwich every time, and worked through my MBA assignments until midnight. I never told anyone at work about it because I knew exactly how they would react. In places like Sterling Ridge, ambition is only celebrated when it belongs to executives. The second someone beneath them starts building options, they treat it like betrayal. The office itself felt like a theater production held together with cheap tape and fake confidence. Promotions went to whoever laughed hardest at the CEO jokes or complimented somebody's vacation photos on social media. Then things became even worse when Trevor's wife, Savannah Kane, suddenly appeared as the company's new head of workplace culture. Nobody could explain what that role actually meant, but apparently it came with authority over meetings, budgets, and employee evaluations. Savannah floated around the office wearing pastel suits and talking about emotional branding while I was trying to prevent regulatory violations that could trigger federal investigations. She once asked me if compliance documentation could feel more uplifting. I remember staring at her wondering if she understood the SEC was not grading companies on optimism. Savannah hated me almost immediately because I refused to play the game. I did not clap during her speeches about workplace harmony. I did not post motivational quotes on internal message boards. I did not pretend federal law was some kind of personality test. I simply did my job while cleaning up the disasters caused by executives who treated legal oversight like an annoying inconvenience. The worst part was that they depended on me constantly while acting like I was replaceable. I answered calls at midnight before audits. I rewrote filings after executives butchered them trying to sound friendlier to investors. I kept the entire company standing upright, while they mocked the person holding the foundation together. Eventually, I stopped complaining altogether, and that should have terrified them. Because when someone like me goes quiet, it usually means they are already planning the exit. The breaking point came during a company celebration at an expensive downtown hotel. It was one of those corporate parties filled with fake laughter, string lights, and executives pretending cheap champagne meant success. I stood near the courtyard sipping club soda, because I still had a finance exam later that night, when Savannah approached me with that carefully rehearsed smile wealthy people use before insulting someone in public. She touched my arm gently and said she heard I was still working on my little MBA project. Then she laughed softly and asked whether it was unprofessional for someone in leadership to spend so much time chasing side goals instead of fully committing to the company. The conversation around us immediately quieted. A few people laughed awkwardly because nobody wanted to risk offending the boss's wife. I just stood there smiling calmly while humiliation spread through my chest like heat under my skin. What nobody realized was that her comment had been planned. 4 hours later, still wearing the same dress from the party, I got called into human resources. The HR director sat across from me speaking in vague corporate language about cultural alignment and organizational harmony. She said the company felt I had become disconnected from the team. I almost laughed in her face because without me the company would have collapsed 6 different ways before lunch. Then she offered me what she called a graceful exit package. I looked at her quietly and asked one question. Who exactly was replacing me as Chief Compliance Officer? She blinked nervously and said, legal would absorb my duties temporarily while leadership explored options. Then she casually mentioned Savannah was excited to help oversee internal ethics initiatives. That was the moment I understood how completely arrogant they had become. They genuinely believed compliance was just paperwork anybody could handle. The next morning, I walked into the office calmly wearing my navy blazer like nothing had happened. I backed up my personal files, deleted private documents from my work laptop, and opened a blank email. Then I typed the cleanest resignation letter of my life. I informed legal, HR, and the executive team that I was resigning immediately from my role as Chief Compliance Officer. I specifically instructed them to update all SEC registrations and Form ADV filings to reflect my departure. Then I returned my badge, handed over my laptop, and walked out of the building without saying goodbye. What they failed to understand was terrifyingly simple. You cannot casually remove a registered Chief Compliance Officer from a financial firm without immediately filing formal updates with federal regulators. Until those documents are officially amended, the last registered officer remains legally connected to every filing submitted afterward. And they ignored my warning completely. The next morning, an old coworker sent me screenshots from internal company chats. Trevor had apparently assigned compliance oversight to Savannah temporarily because, according to him, how hard could it really be? A legal intern tried warning them they needed to update SEC records immediately. Trevor told everyone to stop overreacting and focus on employee morale. Employee morale. The company was standing on railroad tracks while executives argued about playlist choices. Meanwhile, Savannah sent a company-wide email titled, "Integrity is a Mindset," with inspirational quotes and a picture of a cat wearing glasses. I stared at the screenshot in complete disbelief. The legal intern eventually emailed me privately just to say I had been right about everything. I never responded because for the first time in years I understood something important. Their disaster was no longer my responsibility. 2 days later, I received an email from an SEC auditor named Daniel Mercer, informing me there would be a surprise compliance review at Sterling Ridge the following morning. He assumed I still worked there. I politely informed him I had resigned. Then I forwarded the entire conversation to my attorney. The next day, the audit began. At 9 a.m, Daniel Mercer walked into Sterling Ridge, asking to speak with the registered Chief Compliance Officer, listed on federal filings. The receptionist innocently told him I was not in the office yet. Within minutes, panic spread through the building like smoke. Legal teams started searching records. Executives began yelling across conference rooms. Trevor reportedly turned pale when the auditor calmly explained that federal filings had still been submitted under my credentials after my resignation. That meant someone inside the company had filed regulatory documents using the identity of an employee who no longer worked there. The SEC does not treat that as a misunderstanding. By afternoon, the company was under formal investigation. News spread quickly across financial media. Investors started demanding explanations. Internal message chains leaked showing executives trying desperately to find someone to blame. One manager suggested claiming my system access had never been revoked, but security records proved my resignation had been documented properly. They were trapped by their own arrogance. Then came the earnings call disaster. An analyst directly asked Trevor during a live investor call whether the company was under federal review for unauthorized compliance filings made under a former executive's name. Watching the clip online later felt surreal. Trevor stumbled through half-finished answers while analysts kept pressing harder. Another reporter asked whether I had been the sole registered compliance officer during those filings. The silence after that question lasted long enough to destroy a stock price. Sterling Ridge shares dropped nearly 20% by the end of the week. Savannah quietly disappeared from the company days later. As for me, I sat in a quiet university classroom finishing my MBA capstone paper titled Collapse by Design: Executive Negligence and Regulatory Failure in Modern Finance. My professor asked whether the case study had been inspired by personal experience. I smiled and told him only the best lessons usually are. A few weeks later, I gave a guest lecture to graduate students working corporate jobs just like the one I escaped. Near the end, a student asked what the biggest lesson from my experience had been. I looked around the room for a moment before answering honestly. Never become the only thing holding a broken institution together, because the second it collapses, they will try to bury you beneath the rubble they created themselves. That night, I walked home through cold autumn air feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone was finally quiet. No emergency calls. No executive panic. No fake urgency wrapped in motivational language. Just silence. And after everything that happened, silence felt like freedom.